This is episode 07 with entrepreneur and commercial realtor Nathan Smith.
You may know the destination, but do you know the path to take you there? This is Profits to Wealth. We shorten the time it takes for entrepreneurs to find true success through guided conversations alongside industry elites. We'll cover your commonly asked questions and dive into the skills, tactics, and lessons learned from business professionals who've turned the industry on its head through experience, critical thinking, as well as practical money management. It's time to talk business, money, and freedom with your host, Jack Marino Jr.
John Maxwell said, "Pride deafens us to the advice or warnings of those around us." Welcome to Profits to Wealth. This is your host, Jack Marino Jr. Today on the show, I'll be interviewing Nathan Smith. Nathan is an experienced commercial real estate advisor, helping new and existing businesses purchase and lease office, retail, and warehouse space in the Austin, Texas area. In this episode, Nathan shares valuable insight for listeners looking to lease or purchase commercial real estate. He shares the most significant pitfalls associated with commercial real estate transactions and how to navigate them. Nathan also shares some tips on what business owners should look for when negotiating their next lease, as well as when they should opt to purchase instead of leasing. Be sure to listen to the end where Nathan shares his contact information for business owners seeking experienced guidance in their next commercial real estate transaction. Welcome to the show, Nathan. I'm really happy you're here. I know you've got a lot of good things to talk about. We're going to talk today about commercial real estate. So again, I'm excited that you're here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. This is my first time doing a podcast. So I'm really excited to get started.
I'm excited for your journey. So this, you haven't been here. I mean, you were pivotal in getting us into this space. So you haven't seen it fully completed now. Now we have a studio in the space. How do you think we did?
I think you did awesome. I was amazed at the decorations and everything you guys did in here. So you guys went all out, much more than what I anticipated whenever we first started looking at this space and kind of going through the construction process.
We had some really good help. It was not, I would like to claim that we had everything to do with that, but we needed some women and good women in our lives to kind of help balance out the testosterone in this office. So yeah, again, thank you for helping us secure the space. It took us a couple of years to find the right space, but as we're going to talk about today, this is an important process and a very important one in entrepreneurs' journey, right? Because a lot of times the cost of real estate is a high portion of their fixed expenses. So let's start out talking about your own personal journey, how you were led to the commercial real estate industry. So how did you get your start?
You know, I never went to college thinking that I was going to be a commercial realtor or a commercial broker. I, like everybody else, was going to get a job and just, work for a big company my whole life. But I was in medical sales for about 10 years, and then I got in technology sales. So I worked in pharmaceuticals, medical sales, worked for Dell for about 5 years. And then towards my last year of working at Dell, I just was really wanting something else. I wasn't quite sure what that was. And there was a couple of buddies of mine in Austin that were in the commercial real estate business, helping people find and lease office space. And so one thing led to another, and I started working with them. So I never expected to get into commercial real estate. It just kind of happened. But it's one of those things where it's scary because it's commission only. And so my whole life, I worked for a company where I knew that I was going to get paid X amount of dollars every 2 weeks, and I had good benefits and everything else. And when you're working for yourself, whatever business it is, even in commercial real estate, it's commission only. So you don't have that regular paycheck coming in week to week. So it was kind of scary to even think about doing that, but it just happened that I was able to save up some money to kind of keep me to paying the bills while I learned the business and was able to ramp up. And, so it takes a few years to really get your feet wet, get experience, and get people to trust in what you do and your advice.
So you were working at Dell, and then you, I guess, joined up with some of your friends. And so how long did that progression take? Were you doing it like part-time commercial real estate, or was it residential?
Just commercial.
Okay.
Really, commercial real estate in general, you really can't do it part-time and make good money at it. There's tons of realtors. Like in Austin, there's probably 10,000 realtors, but majority of them are part-time, and they make a little bit money here and there. They're really good, busy realtors. They do it full-time. And
Right.
So to really get to know the market and keep a pulse on the market constantly, you have to be in it every single day. Most people, especially companies, I've worked with small and really large companies, and they're not going to hire somebody that's just kind of dabbing in commercial real estate that does a deal every now and then, or that's part-time. They need somebody that truly can represent them, and they're in it full time, and that's all they do.
Right.
So
It's different. Commercial, as I learned through you, it's different. They don't have like the MLS that the residential real estate brokers have, right? And the consumer has. It's really not as transparent.
yeah, and I don't think it ever will be, because with the residential, if you're an agent and you list a property on the MLS, then once it's sold, you're required to post how much it's sold for. So residential agents are able to basically look up online and see, they can give you a market overview and say, hey, well, all these houses sold for exactly X dollars.
Right.
In commercial real estate, it's the Wild West. There's probably 10 to 15 different websites that list properties, and they essentially just scrape data. It's not accurate. It's often outdated, and it kind of misleads consumers. And so we don't have one MLS, where the MLS for residential, it governs the real estate, the realtors. And in the commercial, we don't have any governing body really. So it's hard for consumers to really make the right choice based
Right.
off 10 to 15 different websites with listing data.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we experienced was, we would point out, hey, there's a lease that we want to look at. And then you'd call on it, and it's like that lease was, very old. It is a very different market, the commercial market, than the residential on the lease side. At least I know the buy side's probably the same. And I would argue that is just another reason why, which we'll get in today, hopefully why you want to have representation, because it is not transparent. You can't go on a commercial MLS, quote unquote, and go look at properties and then go find a realtor to help you or even do the transaction yourself. But anyway, I want to learn more about what really led you from that stability, that constant paycheck, like you said. What was the biggest reason why you said, you know what, I'm going to go do something different. I'm going to go get into commercial real estate?
It was just the time. I was at the tail end of that last year in Dell, and I didn't have anything to lose. I didn't have any kids at the time. I wasn't married at the time. My expenses were low. And I had some money saved up, and I figured it was a good opportunity to try something. And I'm a firm believer in trying something, and there's not really failure to me. It's just, I tried it doesn't work out, I go do something else. So there's a lot of things I've done in life that didn't work out for me, but it wasn't the end of the day either. It wasn't the end of the world.
Right. So you really wanted to create something so at that point you had low risk, I guess, if you want to say that, because I know you saved some money as an emergency fund, I guess. So you had some backing there. And also, like you said, you had your expenses were low, but still, you have to take a degree of risk. And I would argue that there's a lot of risk in that, because you're going from a constant paycheck every 2 weeks to, like you said, 100% commission. And that's all dependent on you finding someone that needs, rental space or to buy a building. And I don't know what the sales cycle is on those items. I can only speak from my experience. It's not very short.
Yeah, with like residential real estate, for example, you go out, you find a house, you make an offer, you get under contract, and it's always going to be a 30-day close from the time the contract's executed to the close date.
Right.
In commercial real estate, depending on if you're leasing or buying, it could be 12 months, it could be 6 months, it could be 2 years. A typical lease deal is going to, you have to find the space, you have to negotiate it, do your due diligence, get construction and pricing, review the lease, and then sign it, get it built out, and get it ready to occupy, get all your furniture and everything else. So it is a process. And no matter how big or small, there's a lot more to leasing and buying commercial real estate than residential.
Yeah, I think our process start to finish was around 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it was much longer than I thought because it wasn't like, we had this huge space. Our space is 1,400 square feet. I thought this was going to be something like probably most people do, that it happens much quicker, but there's a lot to it. So, I'm all for hiring a professional like yourself that knows this industry and has their pulse, on the industry and what's out there, because like you said, you can't really dabble in commercial real estate or in real estate in general and be good at it. You have to know what's going on in the industry and really have a lot of connections, I would argue as well. But so you're so you left Dell, you founded Austin Tenant Advisor. Can you tell me more about the company?
Yeah, so Austin Tenant Advisors, we only represent tenants and buyers. And so in the market, there's a lot of big brokerage houses that they represent landlords and they represent tenants and buyers. For me, it's really hard to be able to focus on both. And I feel that tenants and buyers are at a disadvantage in the market. And so I chose to represent tenants and buyers only. And so we work with small businesses and large businesses, and we help them do their site selection to find the right space that meets their ideal size, budget, timing, everything. We help them through the whole process of negotiating a lease or a purchase, through getting contractor bids and trying to help them connect with architects and attorneys and data cablers or anybody else that is going to be needed to help fulfill that project. So in essence, I feel like a project manager sometimes. And so I wear many different hats. I'm not just a realtor or a commercial realtor, but I put my business hat on and I really consult clients on their current and their future needs and just kind of help them through the process.
Yeah, I would say that's where I think I was under the impression that it was more like we talked about earlier, residential real estate, where, you go find a space. That's pretty much after the negotiation. In the residential world, the realtor sort of fades out a little bit. But in your case, in commercial real estate, you just began. I mean, and there was a whole lot of discussions in the beginning, even around what type of business do you have? How many employees do you have? Kind of looking forward, where do you see yourself from an employee standpoint, from a revenue standpoint in 3-7 years, right? Because leases aren't like residential either. They're not 1 year. I mean, a lot of times it could be 7, could be even, much longer than that. So you really have to do a lot of planning. And that's where I think I was surprised that you came in and asked a lot of really good questions that I feel like I had no idea that you were even going to do.
Yeah, and part of that is, not every building is able to accommodate your future needs. And so it's really important for a company to think about, are they going to grow? How many employees do they have now? And what's their head count going to look like a year, 2 years, 3 years from now? Because you could be in a building that the total building square footage is 20,000 square feet, and you need to occupy 5,000 square feet. But then if you expect to grow, well, that building may not be able to accommodate your needs. And so you won't have a choice but to move later on, where if we focused on buildings that were 100,000 square feet or larger, there's more opportunities to grow and kind of expand within that building. So you're not having to keep moving buildings all the time. So
Right.
you might expand within the building. And so there's just lots of different things like that to consider.
Absolutely. So you even said yourself, there's a lot of realtors in Austin, and I'm sure that's the case in most big metro areas. What makes, you and Austin Tenant Advisor different? What's your differentiating factor?
We are a boutique company. Because I'm small, I'm able to really jump in with both feet and not just be a realtor, but put on my business hat. So with larger companies, you may have one or two or three agents and they all split commissions. But because their commissions are getting split, then they don't want to put as many hours into a project. So for me, I'm small and nimble, and I have the ability to really help them find the space, but also help them through the other parts of it. Because leasing commercial real estate is really it's overwhelming, and so people just don't understand all the different pieces of the puzzle they need to put in there. And so some larger companies they'll find you a space, they sign a lease, and they're done.
Right.
And for me, it doesn't end at signing the lease. I like to have the ability to hold their hand and really take them through the entire process and try to make it as easy and efficient as possible. So
Right.
they have a good experience. And also we represent tenants and buyers only. And so there's no conflicts of interest. We don't represent landlords, and we only represent tenants and buyers. But that allows us to focus on their needs only. And we still have great relationships with the landlords and the other agents, but I just feel like that tenants and buyers, they need representation.
I think for me, because I talked to other commercial realtors from an outside, that was an inside outlook. What makes you different from an outside in? I can tell you that you have an entrepreneurial mindset, right? So you have that affinity that I do. And I think that's important because you're asking, like we just talked about, you're asking questions that I feel like some of the other realtors didn't even ask. How much space do you want? And then let me go find it. And it really wasn't the step before that was, how did you derive to that number, right? So you have a mindset, hey, I'm an entrepreneur too. I know what it's like, right? When I sign my name on this lease, I mean, these leases are hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, over the life of the lease. It's a really big decision. And what I also liked was that, you can get clouded by the upfront commission, but I remember you said the first time we looked was, hey, this lease wasn't good for you. And we had to wait another year until we found the right one. But I would say there's not a lot of people that have that ability to not focus on the money. You were focused on us, right? And I think that goes back to not only your character, but also your ability to say, look, I'm in the same shoes you are, and this is what I would do if I were you, knowing what we discovered in our, first interview or first talk.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, there are a lot of realtors out there that they're in it for the money. I mean, everybody wants to make money.
Right.
But I believe in karma too, and also would like to still have a relationship with that person later on. So, yeah, it may be where there's no space right now. I'm not going to try to put them in something just so I can, earn a commission. It may be a year or two later that, something happens, but I'd rather take the time, focus on their needs, and then, be able to find that right space. And if there's a space that's going to save us money, that's going to meet their needs, then that's a space we're going to do. I've had lots of clients where we looked at a bunch of spaces and it was between a nice space and with a 5-year lease, or there was a sublease that I found, and I didn't have to show them the sublease, but my job is to find you the best space, the best layout at the best price. And so we end up doing a sublease. And then after that sublease expires, they grow and they're still with me because I've kind of built that trust within them later on.
Right. Because I mean, the companies ideally you keep growing, right? And you're going to outgrow space. You're going to move up and get bigger building and maybe even buy at some point. So what does your typical client profile look like?
There's lots of different profiles, but it could be any company, any business owner that that needs to grow and expand. It could be a brand new business, so existing or new businesses. New business that's looking for space for the first time. I've never leased space, and so I'm trying to help them, find a new space, negotiate the lease. Existing businesses, then we're looking at, do we stay where we are now? Do we expand? So do we stay and renew, or do we find a different building and move to a different location? I work with all different levels of people within an organization. It could be the CEO, the COO, the CFO. A lot of times they have their administrative assistant in charge of finding the new office space. It could be the sales director. It could be there's so many different titles that I've worked with. It just really depends on that situation, because it could be a company in California opening up a satellite office here, and they just have their local contact who I'm working with to find the space. And then I work with corporate. So there's a lot of different people involved with commercial leasing. It's not just one couple or one person buying a house. There's multiple people involved.
Yes. So if I heard you right, it really anyone from a startup business all the way up to very, very large billion-dollar companies.
Yeah. And, again, because I'm small, again, the larger companies, they've got agents and they're fishing for big, big companies. And so the big companies, they're getting representation. My sweet spot, and where I've found that there's a lack of help, are the people that are leasing 1,000, 2,000 to 5,000 square feet. So a lot of agents just don't focus on that because the commission split is not big enough for them.
Right.
But being small and nimble, it allows me to help the small guy. And so I love working with startups and new businesses because, we're looking at small space, but I don't have a lot of overhead. I don't have all these big corporate splits all over the U.S. And so I'm able to give a small company the same level of expertise and experience that they would get from anybody else. I've been doing this for 14 years now, so I've worked with a lot of different size companies, different types of spaces, and so I've really seen the good and bad and ugly that I'm able to share best practices.
Well, most likely, I would say, I don't have the stats, but if you're representing more of who you're representing is, a lot of spaces that are 5,000 and less, that probably represents a big portion of the small businesses in the United States, because there is a ton of companies, small businesses that aren't, doing underneath. Definitely 25 million is considered small business, but I would argue there's a ton that are doing probably 1 to 5 that are fitting that criteria easily. So that's an important need, right? As we're going to get into which is my next question, is, the pitfalls. From my own perspective, looking at, like we mentioned earlier, those leases, they're not only long, but if you're not careful and you don't know what you're doing, there are tons of pitfalls within there. So in the entire process of leasing, what do you think some of the biggest pitfalls businesses can make if they don't have proper representation?
God, there's so many of them. I mean, companies, sometimes they'll wait till the last minute and they'll have a lease expiring in 30 days, and then they want to start looking for space. And because the process takes so long, or it could be during the holidays where just not much really gets done during that time frame, and they end up being a captured tenant where the landlord knows they haven't been looking at any other spaces, have no other options on the table, but yet their lease expires. And so the landlord kind of has them where they want them. So, they just put themselves in that position. Other pitfalls are not reading the lease, are taking more space than what they need, or not thinking about their growth. They may take a space and they underestimate the speed of which they're going to grow. And And then a year later, they sign a 3-year lease, and a year later, they're having to grow. And so now you're kind of stuck subleasing space. And so they tend to get in a hurry, and you really can't rush the process. Honestly, that the process sucks. It's a long process, but there's really no way to speed it up because, like you said, it is a huge investment. In some cases, over a 3 to 5 year time period, you're going to be spending $300,000, $500,000, $1 million in rent, and little mistakes can add up to big money. And so you have to really understand your needs, how quickly you're going to grow, and make sure we find a location that can accommodate that.
Yeah, I would say in our own experience, those leases are massive, and you really probably should have, which I'm sure you would agree, counsel. You should have an attorney look it over because, as you pointed out yourself, like for example, in our own lease that I had no idea that they could do, it's written in there where if a bigger company comes in and wants to take over your space, I don't remember what the terminology was, but basically they can, boot you out within a certain amount of days notice. And we spent a lot of time, energy, and money on the build out, and that would be heartbreaking if we had to move and maybe the configuration wasn't as good, but it's kind of written in there where they have that ability.
Yeah, and these leases, they're 30 pages in a lot of cases, and so there's a lot of birdseed in there. And if you don't read it, you think the landlord's got your best interests in mind. They're nice people, but they're looking at their return on investment. And so they're not looking out for your best interest. That's where I come in. But there's things I can catch. Like, for example, if you're leasing retail or warehouse space, tenants are typically responsible for maintaining the HVAC unit. And what some tenants don't understand, they think the landlord's going to pay for it, or when they're negotiating the lease, they don't bother to negotiate to get the landlord to have everything inspected and repaired by a licensed technician and get it in writing and try to get a warranty on it. Because let's just say you go lease that space and then a month later the HVAC goes out. Well, you're responsible for it. And now it's going to cost you $5,000. And the landlord's going to just say, hey, well, sorry, it's in the lease. And so once the lease is signed, if anything goes wrong and you call the landlord, what they're going to say is, hey, just look in the lease. Everything's in the lease. Or you're going to say, hey, well, this broke. Can y'all fix it? And they're like, well, sorry, you're responsible for that. And so you really have to understand every bit of that lease. And there's a lot of things that can cost a lot of money.
Yeah. So, there's take your time, make sure that you're not getting too much of a lease, right? Too much square foot too early, right? Because of the costs that can, the negative ramification that can have on the business. Have someone, I know that you pointed out a ton of stuff in our lease, but, have an attorney review it, really know what's in there. Because the other thing that you brought to my attention was the workers' comp. They wanted to have us have workers' comp. The liability insurance they wanted us to have was as if we were insuring Trump Tower. I mean, it was outrageous. Even our insurance agent said the same thing. So, and then that was a negotiating process. I mean, the tenant improvement you were instrumental in that as well, because, what they started out with was much smaller than what we got to, pointing out the, what the lease rate will increase to over time. I mean, there's so many, like you said, there's so many things in that 30-page plus document that you can really step into, and it'll bite you later on. And that, 7 years or longer is a long time. And like you said, it is a really big expense.
Yeah. You mentioned, the tenant improvement allowance and the cost and everything. Well, one of the other things people tend to do is they don't start, early in advance. So you want to start looking for space, whether you're going to move from an existing building or rent new space. You want to start 6 to 12 months before your lease expires or before you need the space. One example of Pitfalls. I had this group call me. At the time, I wasn't helping them, but they rented a space with another group, and the landlord offered them an allowance. And so they thought they had a great deal. They signed the lease. What they didn't do was get preliminary construction bids. So they just figured the landlord was going to pay for it. Everything was good. Well, then they started getting some quotes, and they found out that the city of Austin was going to require them to install some emergency exit and some other stuff. And it was going to cost them an extra $20,000. And so there's lots of tenants that do this. They just think, oh, great, I'm getting $20 a square foot for an allowance. Let's sign the lease and move forward. But they don't do their due diligence and actually meet with contractors and get pricing. And again, it's a process. It takes 2 weeks just to get construction pricing sometimes because you want to get multiple preliminary bids. And you got to know, is a permit required? Can you do it with or without a permit? Do you need architectural drawings or MEPs? You got to make sure you understand the cost, the total cost of leasing the space. It's not just the lease rate. There's the tenant improvements. Are you paying your electric or are you paying your own janitorial? Who pays for that? So you really got to understand who's responsible for what.
So when you're helping someone negotiate a lease, what are the biggest areas within that lease that you're really helping them negotiate? Because I would imagine the bigger, let's say, institutionally owned buildings, they probably don't have as much wiggle room on that lease, but there are some things that they do. So what are the biggest things that you think that you would help listeners with from a negotiating standpoint?
It really depends on the size of their business. Obviously, the bigger you are, the more leverage you have. And also it's important to have good financials. That helps you, in negotiations also. But when you're looking at a lease, you can negotiate tenant improvement allowance. You can negotiate caps on expenses. You can get landlord to give warranties on certain things. And there's just so many different things, but it really depends on the size and scope of the project. So one thing you don't want to do is over negotiate. And so you've got to understand the landlord and the market itself. And know if you're 500 square feet, you're not going to be able to have much leverage in the negotiation. They're not going to put a cap on expenses. If you're 20,000 square feet, you can usually negotiate to have a cap on controllable expenses. So,
it really is a relationship business because having the relationship with all of you knew a lot of the other commercial realtors that were representing the big institutional buildings that we were looking at. So having those relationships and knowing hey, I've dealt with, these guys before, these are the things they're probably not going to budge on. And these we have a little bit more negotiating room on. So I would assume that having experience is really key in the commercial world.
Yeah, it helps. Again, it's you want to get the best deal, but you also, if you start to lowball these landlords, they're not going to take you seriously. And so the market drives everything, just like in the residential world. But there's a lot more to negotiations than just focusing on the rate. There's other things you can do to try to kind of trade on negotiation points. And so just understanding what all is negotiable and then kind of going through, okay, what's the most important? And, I've read probably 400 different leases. And so more than a lot of attorneys, unless they're a real estate attorney. There's some business attorneys that do quite a few different things. And so they might review a couple of leases a year. And so I know I'm pretty dangerous when it comes to reviewing leases, but I still always recommend that they have an attorney review. And then I'll get on the phone with their attorney and we'll go through it and I'll let them know what market is and kind of hear from them what's really important. And then we'll try to kind of meet in the middle on, how to respond back to a landlord.
Right. Because I'm sure the attorney's going to find some things that they probably want to push back on. But again, if you're a smaller tenant, the big corporation's probably not going to, budge on that.
Yeah. It's really important to understand the market as a whole, because let's say there's this one space and you really, really love it. and you think you're an expert negotiator, so you're gonna go in and just be really aggressive, they're gonna be like, sorry guys, we got somebody else that's interested, so you're gonna lose that space. I've got a client in downtown Austin right now that it became a competitive situation, and this finance guy for the company is not in Austin, so he doesn't really understand the market. And we really didn't have any other options. There was this one space in the building we needed to expand, and other than that, our option was to take space in a different building downtown, which means now we're having to walk back and forth. It's not ideal. And so the finance guy wanted to get really aggressive, and I had to let him know, look, there's somebody else willing to do a 5-year lease. We just want to do a 3-year. So it's important that you understand kind of what the situation is. I'm willing to go and try to negotiate for a lower rate, more TI allowance, and get really aggressive. But if we do that, there's a good chance that they're going to give the space to somebody else.
Right.
And so it's important that they understand the situation, and because otherwise, if we lost that space, we don't have any other options. And so it sucks sometimes. I mean, even in the residential, you got to pay full price for a house. And if you really want that house and you're going to think you're going to go in there and be this expert negotiator. So negotiations is more than just being able to get everybody to lower their price or give you better deal. It's also, I mean, sometimes you have to get what you want too. And that means you're going to have to pay a little bit more.
Yeah,
So-
it's definitely a win-win situation. I know that I'm a big negotiator, and I know that was the first thing that you mentioned to me was, we got to be careful here, because if we negotiate too hard, they're going to, like you said, they're going to just think you're not serious and move on. Especially, Austin is a very desirable place. There's companies moving in, multiple companies moving in every day. So it's not like there's a whole lot of space just laying around empty. So I think that's good advice. We've been talking a whole lot about lease. So when do you think, business owners should have a different conversation, and, maybe it should go towards buying?
I get a lot of companies, especially outside of Austin. I've got one right now. And they're like, hey, well, we're interested in buying. And they're currently in St. Louis. And, prices are a little bit different in St. Louis. In Austin Metro, it's pretty expensive. And so when somebody tells me they want to lease or that they want to buy, I have to, again, I put on my business hat and ask them, okay, so let's say you're a software company, and how much margin do you make on your service? So when you sell your service, like, what are you making on average? And if, 20%, whatever. Like, well, in the real estate market, you're not going to make 20% day one. The real estate market is the long hold. So yes, if you've been in business for, 5 to 10 years and you've got stable income and you're looking to diversify your portfolio and you're not going to grow, you're not going to add headcount, you've got 10 employees and you might hire 2 or 3 more, but that's probably it, then buying might be a good option for you. But if you're a brand new company and you've got investors investing, or maybe you have some cash, it's probably better for you to lease because you want that cash to put back into your company. So
Right.
again, it's like, okay, what provides you the better return? It's the same thing if your finance guy said, hey, let's invest your money. You've got options. You've got money market. You've got mutual funds. You can buy individual stocks. You can do real estate. And you're really looking at what's my opportunity for each one to make money. So mutual funds, you're probably making 10, 15% or less. A stock, you might be able to make 30 or 40%. It just really depends. And so if I'm able to so I have to look at real estate in my business. If I put in $100,000 into my business to ramp up sales and generate more income, and my margin is 20%, and I put $100,000 into buying a building or an office condo, and I'm going to make, what's the appreciation is 3 to 4% every single year, and I'm going to, probably sell it in 3 years. You're not going to recoup your money. And so it's really a 5 to 10 year hold on real estate. You make your money when you sell it. And so initially, there's going to be, it may appreciate 3 to 4%. In a busier market, it may do a little bit more. But let's say you go buy something though, and then, it's perfect for the number of employees you have right now. But then 2 years later, you all of a sudden get this big PO and you need to hire 30 people. Well, now you're screwed. Now you have to go find something to lease, but you also own this building. Now you have to sell it and try to get out of that. And maybe it's a down market. It's not easy to sell. And so it's just really looking at your current situation and, what makes you the most money. So really, if you're stable and you've been in business for a long time, you're not going to hire anybody else. Buying's a good option. If you're new and you're still ramping up, then you definitely should probably look at leasing right now.
Right. It's all about that opportunity cost because as you pointed out, if real estate longer term, let's say the total return cash on real estate is on office, let's say 12.5%, 13%. If my growth in the company is 30, 40%, and I still need cash injection, just like you said, you're probably better off putting that money in the business and doing a lease because especially when you don't know what your head count's going to be in 2 to 3, 4 or 5 years. And then you have the headache, like you mentioned as well, that you have to sell the building now, move somewhere else, and you've got a lot of costs associated with that. And either you're going to have to incur the cost to sell, get it ready to sell, or lease, right? So it's a big headache, and there's a lot of responsibilities, just like they are with owning residential. There's, I would argue, even more in the commercial side. It's exciting to say you own something, especially real estate, but I would argue that it comes at a, it's a give and take on anything that you want to purchase. And I'm glad you pointed out that opportunity cost.
Yeah. And owning sounds glamorous. And I had a client last year as a finance company, and they owned a building over off Spicewood Springs in Northwest Austin. And I met with him, and that guy could not wait to sell that thing. And he wanted a lease. The building was getting older, and it got to the point where he was having to replace the roof and it needed a paint job, needed new siding, and the inside was getting outdated. And so he had to start thinking about kind of updating and modernizing the building to compete with everything else. And they also shrank a little bit too, so they weren't occupying the whole thing. So he had this extra space he had to lease. And so just the whole management of all that, he wanted to focus on his business, not trying to focus on maintaining this piece of real estate. So that he could not wait to sell that thing and get into a lease. He could just, let the landlord handle that, and he can focus on his business is where he makes more money.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility. So as we've talked about today, there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of consideration whether you're going to lease something, which is probably the most common contract, right, is a lease versus a buy or sell. You need to have proper representation, and I've had really good experience with you. And so I want to let our listeners know if, you're looking for office space, whether you want to lease or buy, I would recommend personally that you call Nathan at Austin Tenant Advisors. So how can we best reach you?
Best way to reach me, website, austintenantadvisors.com or 512-861-0525. Or you can find me on the internet too. A lot of times if you're searching for office space for rent in Austin, Texas, you can find me. I do a lot of social media and so a lot of marketing and everything. So you'll find me out there. I'm always blogging on office space lease tips and sharing my knowledge out there on the internet.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom on commercial real estate. Before we wrap up, this is the fun part of the show because I get to find out more information about Nathan Smith. So this is what I call my rapid fire. So how do you keep your edge? How do you keep the sharpened, if you will? Because I believe that constant never-ending improvement is key to success personally and in the business.
And I do a lot of different things. As we get older, it's harder to keep that edge. And so I feel like it's just something you have to nurture every single day. But I listen to a ton of podcasts. I do a lot of reading other people's blogs. And, through Amazon, audible.com. I listen to ebooks while I'm driving. So I try to minimize downtime. And anytime that I'm in a car driving, I'm not listening to the radio. I'm just listening to just stuff that's going to help nurture my mind and my body.
That's good. So is there anything specific in real estate that how you keep up with the real estate market?
Really, it's just doing deals every day and talking to other agents in town. And obviously I pay for software and everything that kind of gives me market data as well. But it's really, you just have to be in the market and doing deals to understand what's negotiable and what's not.
So who so far has been in your life the most impactful?
I don't really have one person. Growing up, it was a lot of my friends' parents that, in my eyes, were successful. And so just really trying to imitate what they were doing. And then, just learning from everybody, really, from you or anybody. Everybody, to me, has something of value for me to learn. So I really try to take bits and pieces from everybody.
That's so true. That's what we just hired someone recently. And that's the first thing I mentioned is that I'm looking to learn something from you because I know I have a lot that I'm going to, share with you, obviously, in the training process. But I'm looking for, people that can share as well. And there's always, like you said, there's always something you can learn from everyone. So if you could recommend one book, I know it's probably tough, but what would it be?
Man, I've read a lot of books. I listened to a lot of books, but one book that always comes back in mind is Fear the Fear and Do It Anyway. I forget who wrote it, but one of my biggest regrets is there's things that I haven't done. There's probably things I haven't done now just because I'm afraid to do it. I'm afraid of what people are going to say or do or think or what might happen. I might fail. And so this book, I read this back in the 90s, and it's just a simple book. And it just really just tells people that don't be afraid. Just go do it. Try it. And if you fail, who cares? You just try again, do something different. But there's nothing wrong with it. And so it's probably the book that sticks out in my mind the most.
I have not read that, but I'll have to look it up. I'm just curious, though. What are you referring to that you would like to do that you're afraid?
There's just lots of things. Just like investing. A lot of people want to invest in commercial real estate or they want to buy rental properties. And we talk about it, but we don't do it sometimes, so... Or speaking in public. I used to be afraid to speak in public. I used to stutter a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, I actually stuttered a ton and I was afraid to speak in public. And so I started teaching CPR classes and actually forcing myself to do things that I was afraid to do. And the more that I did it, then I realized, okay, this is not so bad. Or this podcast, this is my first time doing a podcast. And so sometimes you're not sure how it's going to go or if it'll sound scripted or whatever, So it's just trying different things. It may not work out, but these days you've got to try different things, whether you're doing marketing for your business and see what works. Because if you don't, you'll never know.
That's so true. Fear keeps you from the things that, the uncomfortable things in life typically are where the opportunities and growth are. We all want to be comfortable, and fear keeps you in that comfort zone. You can't grow and you can't discover new things if you're always afraid. So that's really good wisdom there.
Yeah, I tell my kids every day, I'm just like, look, don't ever be afraid to try anything. Don't be afraid that you're going to fail. Because they'll tell me sometimes that, well, I'm afraid to do that, because I'm afraid of what they're going to say or whatever. But just don't be afraid. Just do it. Just try it.
It's good advice. So what do you do in your free time?
Free time, I'm really into working out, training, eating healthy. I used to do a lot of triathlons and running and mountain biking, lifting weights. There's a lot of people that do yoga to help them with their body and their mind. And for me, or people meditate too. For me, when I exercise, that's my meditation. So if I get on the bike or run, I'm really just in tune with my body. And it also helps give me confidence in everything else I do. So if I feel like that, if I'm feeling good in my body and my mind, then it's helped me be successful. And for me, that's always been kind of my source of confidence is really just taking care of my health.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. And I've actually had the opportunity to work out with you, and you pushed me to some levels that I have never been on my own, especially with, I don't know how many pounds. It felt like at least a 3-pound jump rope that we had, and then we'd run lines. So I agree with you. That is something that you and I both share in common, that that is a form of meditation. It's a form of stress release. And of course, you only get one body, so you need to take care of it. Otherwise, it's going to fail. And then if it fails, everything else doesn't matter. So what about financial freedom? What does financial freedom mean to you?
Financial freedom is just being able to buy things and not have to wonder if you can afford it, really. Because I know just growing up through college, I pinched pennies, and I'm still mentally, I'm cheap. You ask my wife, she wants me to spend more sometimes. But it's funny though, when you start making some money and you go to the store or you go buy something and you don't have to check your bank account, you buy it. And so it's a weird feeling to being able to just go buy something. Like, I'm going to go spend $80 or I'm going to go, it doesn't matter, but I don't have to go and, well, let's go check my bank account and see if I can afford that.
So that financial freedom, what do you think is the number one gift that financial freedom gives you? How does it make you feel?
Yeah, it's just, I guess, just more or less stressed about money. You're always trying to work really ultimate financial freedom is to not have to work, and just knowing that you don't have to work, but you can live, but you work because you want to. And so I don't feel like I'm at that point right now, but just being able to buy things, not have to worry about it. So it just takes away the worries of knowing that you have the money to pay for things.
I like that. That's actually our number one initiative in Lake Hills Wealth Management is to make work optional, which I think is the definition, like you mentioned, of what financial freedom really is. Yes, it gives you the ability to buy what you want, but really it gives you the ability to make work optional. I'm not an advocate for not doing anything once you achieve that, because the two highest human needs are growth and contribution. And I feel like that is how you get to ultimate fulfillment, is if you continue to grow no matter what your bank account is, and you can continue to contribute. It's not about me anymore. It's about we. So I'm with you on that. I love that definition. So how does Nathan Smith want to be remembered? I know you're a husband, you're a dad, you're a business owner, but how do you want to be remembered?
I guess I just want to be remembered as somebody who just really tries and continuously works hard at making a better life for myself. Just knowing where I came from and knowing where I am now, just really setting a good example for my kids to let them know that it's okay to fail, and don't worry about what people think, and just really instill that confidence in their mind. So I want them to know that it's okay to feel insecure sometimes, but as long as you keep taking those steps forward, then that insecurity goes away sometimes. So really just somebody that's just that tries hard, works as hard as he can for his family and for his friends, and for anybody he come in contact with.
I love that. So the last question I have for you is, we're all about this show. One of the things that we're about is I'm looking for ways to shorten the time it takes to reach true success. And I know true success isn't an absolute term. It is relative, but I'm looking for tips. So what's one parting tip, advice, piece of wisdom that you would like to share with listeners?
Well, this is one thing that I probably am not great at. I could do better, but I think people need to put their egos down and really just learn from people. Don't feel like that you know everything, or don't feel like you have to know more than everybody else. Or don't feel like that you're asking dumb questions. Get a mentor. Just let people help you, or ask for help. But when you do that, you have to be able to reciprocate too, and not just looking for handouts for help, but if you're going to go ask for a mentor, hey, what can I do for you? And, to help you out too. So that's one thing that I've never really been good at, is just really trying to find somebody to take me under their wing. I guess my ego would got in the way. So really, you just got to drop the ego and just pretend that you don't know anything and don't be the smartest guy in the room.
And that is some of the best. And you've given a lot of good advice, but I would agree with you 100%. There's a book that Ryan Holiday wrote, and actually he lives in Austin. I would love to get him on the show one day. He's written 4 books, but Ego is the Enemy. And he is a big Stoic, and he references Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius a lot. I really like his style of writing, but there's so many examples in history, in the Bible, in whether you're studying theology, philosophy, or whatever. There's so many warnings about ego. So I think that's very, very good advice, is to, you already mentioned you can learn something from everyone, and that, your ego will get you in trouble. So thank you for sharing that. I want to remind our listeners that we welcome questions, whether it's about finance, whether it's about business. We want to hear from you. It could be something that you want to ask about commercial real estate. You can either, specifically ask Nathan or go to profitstowealth.com/contact, or go to any of our social media outlets and fire away. We welcome your question. Last thing I want to remind everyone is that if you're a fan of Alexa, there's a cool feature. You can actually connect Apple Podcast with Alexa and say, hey, Alexa, play Profits to Wealth on Apple Podcast, or Alexa, play the previous episode. So technology is now making everything much easier, and in some ways is making us lazy, I guess. But that's pretty cool. I don't know if you use Alexa, but it really can spoil you. So Nathan, hey, I appreciate you coming into the studio, coming back in the office, which you helped us find. And you have shared a lot of wisdom, and I am excited to keep following you. I know you're going to be successful.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
That's all for this episode of Profits to Wealth. But we have more resources available to you on our website. Head over to profitstowealth.com and take our questionnaire to find out how we can provide you with a tailored approach to your entrepreneurial journey. It's available exclusively on profitstowealth.com. Until next time, we look forward to talking business